It is an age of great prosperity and great strife. It is an age when magnificent cities are founded, when incredible monuments are built, when intrepid explorers sail the waves in search of riches and adventure. It is the dawn of discovery. Dawn of Discovery, or Anno 1404 if you use the metric system, is a building and management simulator where you take the role of a governor who oversees various cities as they are established and then developed at different locations throughout the known world. Your primary duties are to settle various islands, then harvest the natural resources of those islands and use those resources to construct buildings and infrastructure for your population. Like many of its contemporaries, development is facilitated through infrastructure and commodities. Low-class housing can automatically upgrade into high-class housing when certain resource needs have been met. So your goal is to make sure that those resources are constantly flowing into your settlement in order to meet the needs of your population. As your population grows, their needs become more complex, and you'll eventually have to expand outward to other islands in order to take advantage of new resources. At that point, you'll need to set up trading routes to make sure that these new commodities are being transported to the different islands that need them. And that right there is Dawn of Discovery's key game feature. Not the building and management aspects, which are pretty standard for the genre, but the inter-island trading. Your settlements will live and die based on how efficiently you are able to transport resources between the different islands. And this adds a fair amount of complexity because in most management games, you're only having to worry about the supply chains on the current map. In Dawn of Discovery, each island has its own individual supply chain, and then there are the inter-island supply chains. And if something breaks down, it can have a figurative resonance cascade of consequences. Keep that in mind for later. Now, for the most part, Dawn of Discovery's gameplay is pretty straightforward. You put down houses and harbors, you link roads between your suppliers and your manufacturers, you make sure that different commodities are available and that they're being traded between islands. Taxes and expenses are paid out automatically, and you can assign your population to upgrade their homes when they see fit. Now, the difficulty and complexity of Dawn of Discovery comes from managing supply chains. Now, the first part of this complexity is that there are a lot of supply chains. For instance, basic peasants need spices in order to upgrade into citizenry, but you can't get spices from typical northern forest islands. In order to get spices, you have to settle a different type of island, a southern tropical island. Now, a tropical island not only has different base resources available to it, but a different type of population that you can build on it. Nomads. Nomads have their own resources that they need in order to upgrade and are not compatible with peasants, so they require their own completely separate supply chain. Then, once you've actually started producing spices, you're going to need a trading ship to transport it back to the original island and give it to the peasants. And you're probably going to want to assign escorts to that ship to make sure it doesn't get attacked by pirates. Now look at that. Look at all that. I got 2 islands, 2 different populations, who knows how many trade ships, dozen different resources, all just to get my peasants from level 1 to level 2. Here's the thing though, everything I just described is not a deal breaker. In fact, for a management game, it's kind of standard. Large supply chains, multiple resources, that's all fine, and even to be expected to a certain extent. No, the real problem with Dawn of Discovery, the real flaw in my opinion, is that despite all of this, the game provides you with no derivative or consolidated information for you to work with. Now, what do I mean by derivative information? Well, let me give you an example. I need fish for pretty much all my northern settlements. It's my basic foodstuffs, and all of my peasants need it in order to be happy and satisfied. Getting fish is a simple matter. It has one of the most basic supply chains. I build a fisherman's hut, the fisherman goes out, he brings me fish. Brings it back to the warehouse, my peasants eat it directly from the warehouse, and that's it. Now, here's a question. How many fish does my fisherman bring in every minute? The answer? I don't know. Here's a better question. How many fish does my current population of peasants consume every minute? Don't know. Probably the most useful question. How long can my current population survive on the amount of fish I have in my storehouses? Again, don't know. This is what I mean by derivative data. It's information based off the raw minute-to-minute activities of my various settlements. Information that allows me to plan long-term, to know when cutoff points are, to know where the inefficiencies lie. Without these information, the best I've got is just past experience and guesswork, and that is not an ideal situation to be in when you're trying to manage multiple settlements at the same time. Because you've got no idea if you're really doing a good job or if you're just overproducing enough to cover all your bases. You've just got no information to work with. The best the game gives you is that in your warehouses you can click on a resource and know whether it's increasing or decreasing at the current moment. But it never tells you why that's happening. It never tells you if there's a problem with your supply chain, or if the resource has run out, or if population expansion has increased your need for it. You've got just no derivative information to work with. Now, at this point you might be thinking to yourself, well, I can probably brute force my way past this. I'll just make sure to overproduce and check in on my peasants every now and then. Plus, the game's got a helpful pop-up system, so I'll know whenever something's gone wrong and I can put out fires as need be. Oh sure, you might think that'll work, but then you're going to start running into the game's second critical flaw, that it has no consolidated information. You see, how are you going to know how many resources a particular island has, whether it's run out or whether it's full up? Well, I'll tell you how, and it's the only way how. You're going to have to go there, click on the warehouse, and then tab over to the page with the resources on it and look at it manually. And then, if you want to know the resource count on another island, you got to go to that island and do the same thing. Click on the warehouse, tab over. And then if you want to know it on another island, guess what? Got to do it again. Pan and scan over and over, clicking on every warehouse on every island, sorting through all the sheets of resources until you find the information you're looking for. This is what I mean when I'm talking about consolidated information. There's no one place where you can go and get a breakdown of all your islands and their current status. The best you got, the absolute best that you can get, is a little sidebar that just lists all the different islands and the warehouses on them. And that's not much help, considering you still gotta click on every single one in order to actually visit them. Even your trade management screen doesn't give you any information until you start individually clicking on the different icons. Even checking on your population requires going to the individual cities and clicking on the different housing types in order to get an understanding of if their needs have been met. It is a cruel system they have devised here, and I suppose I should admit it's not impossible to play, but it is a game where the difficulty curve scales exponentially and increases every time you try and settle a new island, because you're only adding more variables that you have to keep track of. The game isn't going to be doing you any favors. And oh man, I haven't even mentioned some of the more esoteric elements of Dawn of Discovery, like its intriguing fertility system where different islands have different crops that you can plant on them, and southern tropical islands have water resources that you have to manage. Or, oh hey, the combat system, which is also really finicky. It's hard to get into since it requires several levels of population growth, and even then, your troops don't work as individual units. Instead, they work as camps that you have to move into open spaces on the enemy's terrain. It's a confusing thing. And the reason I'm probably not going to talk about them a whole lot is because They're minor details compared to the game's overwhelmingly lackluster information system, which puts almost all of the responsibility of management on the player. And yet, here's the thing. I really kind of like Dawn and Discovery. Oh, I really do. Resource management is a huge pain. You're constantly putting out fires, both figurative and literal. Combat is very weird and hard to get into, but I can't help but admit it scratches an itch. I mean, as far as management games goes, it has everything that I could thematically desire, with population levels and being able to build multiple settlements and trading in between them for resources. That's all good stuff. Still, I can't in good conscience recommend this game. For a score, I'd give it a 2 out of 4. It's not mechanically flawed, but it is not efficient enough with its information to be really fun to play. If you think you're genius enough to figure this one out, you're welcome to it, but try to heed my warning nonetheless. Alright, thanks for listening. Now if you'll excuse me, I gotta go look for some sailors.